it's time. I feel like I should have the Rocky music on in the background. Gasp! Which thriller will win? Hi guys, it's Lehane, and welcome to the video that you've all been waiting for. The most consistent question, the number one thing that I get asked on my channel is, what is your favourite thriller book? And that is not an easy question for a book person to answer. But what kind of thriller? What pacing of thriller? Which new thriller is my favourite, or which has been my favourite for the longest? And so I decided it's about time to just put them all into one video. So this, my friends, is my top 10 favourite thrillers. I encourage you to view this video, if you will, as a time capsule. It represents Lehanne's favourite thrillers as of right now. In 6 or 7 more years on BookTube, who knows what my favourite thrillers will be? Doesn't the idea of 6 or 7 more years of potentially top 10 thrillers just make you really happy? It makes me very emotional. And yes, I shall be ranking these thrillers from 10 to 1 to my tippy top most favouriteest thriller in the whole world. And by that point in the video I will no longer be accepting opinions, thank you. We could be here for a while, so let's just get started. In at number 10 is Shutter Island by Dennis Lehane. And yes, as you can tell from Leonardo DiCaprio brooding ominously on the cover, this one has had a rather good movie adaptation that in fact I started with. Controversy! I didn't know that this one was a book adaptation when I first watched it, and as soon as I found out, I picked it up immediately and I was not disappointed. Picture, if you will, 1954 on a very small boat in a very choppy ocean. Teddy Daniels, a US Marshal, and his new partner are heading towards Shutter Island, which is a very secure psychiatric criminal facility. Teddy and his partner are heading to Shutter Island because murderous Rachel Solando has gone missing. In this case, gone missing is more complicated than Rachel escaping, because there's literally no way to escape from this facility into any part of this extremely inhospitable island without help. So Teddy's initial supposition is that someone from the facility has helped Rachel escape. Teddy thinks that his day is quite bad enough as it is, but then a hurricane starts up and they are stranded on this island, which is being slowly flooded. And then all of a sudden something changes, and in the midst of all of this chaos, Teddy starts to get flashbacks to a time that he's absolutely sure can't be real. Shutter Island is one of those books that creeps up on you in the most ominous way. The beginning of the book is quite slow. You're getting to know Teddy, you're getting to know the people around him, but then something changes. There's a tone shift, and all of a sudden you're starting to be a little bit afraid of everything. You believe nobody. If you're the person who likes to go, haha, that is a red herring and it shall not fool me, this is the book for you. This book also did one of my absolutely favourite things, which is, even though I knew the ending before I went in, I had forgotten about it by the time I got to the end of this book, and I was once again completely breathtaking. I literally sat there like, no, but oh yes. Oh yes. Next up, coming in at number 9, is Dead Girls by Abigail Tartellin, a book that I have been absolutely evangelical about since the very last page. This is one of those thrillers that if I had the means, I would buy for everybody and make everybody read it, because I think it's one of those perfect books, one of those books that has something in it for everybody coming from every genre. Set in the 90s, we follow 11-year-old Thera and her best friend Billy. They are best forever friends. They tell each other absolutely everything. They are essentially the same person. And then one day, Billy goes missing. It's the 90s, so nobody assumes foul play and everybody just assumes that she has run away for an adventure. But Thera absolutely knows that if Billy had run away, she would have told her first, and so she goes looking for her and she finds Billy's dead body. But from the moment that Thera hands that investigation over to the adults, from the moment that Thera tells people where Billy is, she is absolutely sure that none of them are ever going to find the person who did this. And so Thera decides that she is going to conduct her own investigation. But as the tagline of the book says, there's a fine line between doing the right thing and doing something very, very bad indeed. This book absolutely seeped into my soul. It's such a perfect portrayal of growing up in the 90s in Britain, where you had so much freedom. Nobody was afraid of anything, and so kids who were 11 could roam their entire town and it wasn't a big deal. Dead Girls also has this glorious twist where by the middle of the novel you realise that something about the narration is just not quite right, that there's something holding this story together which is making you feel a little bit icky. There's definitely a little like hint of, can I completely believe everything that Thera is telling me? And the end, I was just not okay. I'm not okay now. I'm not okay now thinking about it. I'm not okay. Next up at number 8 I have what is a tiny shift in tone, the only classic on this list, and that is The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. This is about Walter Hartwright. The night before he takes off into the countryside to take up a position as a drawing master to two very accomplished young ladies, his carriage is stopped in the middle of a dark and misty London street because there is a woman dressed entirely in white standing in the road. Walter immediately gets out and goes to help this extremely distressed woman who is clearly running from something. He puts her in his carriage and he sends her to the address that she asks for, and he doesn't think about it again. But when he gets to the new job, he discovers that one of the women there, Laura Fairley, is the spitting image of the woman in white. Over the course of the next few months, Walter falls head over heels in love with Laura, but there's a slight problem because Laura is betrothed to Sir Percival Glyde. He is a fortune hunter and all he wants is Laura's fortune, and he's gonna get it whether Laura's alive or dead. In case you hadn't already picked up from the dark and misty London street, this is such an atmospheric thriller. There are so many scenes in this book that were just branded in my brain so vividly from the first time that I read this, which was like 10 years ago. It's written entirely in diary entries from Walter and Marion, who is the other young lady that he goes to teach, and also from a few other people who you might not quite be as comfortable with talking to you from a diary. This book also has one of my favourite gothic villains in it ever, Count Fosco, who has a penchant for bonbons and white mice, not necessarily in that order. And also my favourite queer-coded heroine ever in the entire world, Marion Halcombe, who just thinks that if men were a little bit more forthright, they would get more things done. This one is just mwah, chef's kiss. Perfect. Coming in at number 7, we have a much more recent release from the queen of standalone thrillers, in my humble opinion, Karin Slaughter. This is The Good Daughter, and honestly, I don't even know where to start. I get way too excited talking about this one because it is yet another almost perfect book for me. And to make it like even more perfect, perfect plus perhaps, this one is about sisters. This one follows Charlotte and Samantha Quinn. 28 years ago, their entire life in tiny town Pikeville was blown apart. Their father is a lawyer, a notorious defence attorney who takes on cases that no other lawyers in the county will touch. And one of those cases blows up in his face and it rips their entire family apart. All of those 28 years later, however, both of those sisters, both Charlotte and Sam, have become defence attorneys. Charlotte has gone to the big city. She has become a defence attorney in an extremely wealthy firm. Samantha, on the other hand, has stayed in Pikeville and works for her dad, taking on the no-hope cases. Then one day, Charlotte receives a phone call from Sam. Her sister never calls her. They barely speak from one year to the next, but Sam begs her to come home because a horrible act of violence has once again happened in Pikeville and her father is in trouble, and Charlotte is forced to fly home into the midst of what she sees as her father's chaos. There, she not only gets dragged into a case that is nothing like the squeaky clean clients that she takes on back home, but also a case that seems to have mysterious links to what happened to her family all those 28 years ago. I love a good family thriller. In fact, I think complicated family relationships are my favourite thriller dynamic. Where like you don't necessarily like each other, but you're stuck with each other and you are each other's person and you have to help them no matter what. I have never loved a set of characters as much as I have loved the Quinn sisters. They're so afraid to talk to each other, they're so afraid to like each other. Getting close means letting down so many boundaries, and yet through all of this there is this compulsive plot which just pushes them further and further into danger and closer together. I should also point out that there is a fair bit of like, ugh. Karin Slaughter does not hold back on the gore, and this is a sterling example of that. Put it this way, if you make it through the first 20 pages, you're golden for the rest of the book. Yet another thriller that I say should be on everybody's top 10 thriller lists. Coming in at number 6 is a thriller that is in fact fairly new to me. I only read it at the end of last year and I have not stopped talking about it since. In fact, I think it's fair to say that I have pushed it on as many thriller loving friends as I can without being expelled from said friendships. Seriously, I'm quite surprised the title of this isn't like a watchword in all of my group chats. She's talking about it again. Banner. The book that I'm talking about is of course The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. Lisa Jewell has swiftly become one of my go-to authors for thrillers. Her novels have this amazing mix between really snappy, like page-turning mysteries, compulsively likeable characters where you just want to spend more time in their heads, and this horrible, you constantly want to look over your shoulder in case there's something there atmosphere. In The Family Upstairs, we follow Libby. On her 25th birthday, she unexpectedly receives a letter from a solicitor that tells her that her birth family, people who she had never been even passingly curious about, have left her a rather large fortune, all tied up in a huge and sought after house in Chelsea. Libby has a very ordinary life, and in fact she clings onto that. She has a list that she wants to achieve before a certain age that includes being married, owning a flat and getting a promotion at the bathroom sales company that she works for. It does not involve large empty houses in Chelsea. The problem is, however, that going to visit the lawyer and finding out about this house uncovers a lot of other things about Libby's past that she did not know. Like the fact that she has another very strange name. Like the fact that she was found alone in her crib in that house in Chelsea. Like the fact that the only clue to what happened to her was a note asking that she be taken care of. Like the fact that 2 floors down there were 3 rotting corpses. There are so many just good building blocks of a thriller here. There's like an impossible mystery, there's a person who knows nothing about her past, there's this investigative journalist, and then there's this second point of view which drops in completely randomly with absolutely no identifying features and way back in the past. So you know that the second narrator was there when these things were happening. Honestly, I'm sitting here wringing my hands. It is a hand-wringing mystery. It makes me feel so creepy and so suspicious. It just incites all of the thriller feelings. One of the quotes on this one calls it compulsively readable, and I do not think I have ever agreed with a quote more in my entire life. Coming in at number 5 is a thriller that will surprise absolutely nobody. Some of the thrillers on this list are a little bit obscure, but this one absolutely does not fit that criteria. It is of course Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. I always hesitate to recommend Gillian Flynn now because I feel like everybody is over hearing about her books because they are so saturated. Gone Girl and Dark Places have had a movie, although the Dark Places movie was really bad. And Sharp Objects has had an amazing adaptation, but everybody's just kind of a little bit over it, which I think is just such a shame because Sharp Objects is so good. One of my favourite thriller tropes is coming back to your small town, and as with The Good Daughter, Camille Preaker has escaped her small town and is forced to go back. Camille comes from a tiny town in the south where the industry has died out, and so everybody knows everybody because it's all everybody has to do. She has put her mother's creepy Victorian house very much in her past, and then one day her editor at the newspaper that she works at asks her to go back home and report on a case because in her tiny small backwater town where nothing happens, 2 little girls in very close succession have turned up dead. Her editor thinks that there's a serial killer operating in this tiny town, but that the main tabloids are ignoring it because it's such a little backwater place. He wants her to go and get the scoop, but he also wants her to go and heal because Camille is not okay, and almost all of what she sees as her damage comes from her childhood. It's impossible to say anything else tangible about this one without giving you spoilers because it's a relatively short book, but oh, so many things happen. There's such a lashing of Southern Gothic in this. Everything feels very like slow and treacly and warm and sticky, and like you're wading through things that you really shouldn't be. This thriller is literally the embodiment of that TikTok meme where you're like, oh no, oh no, oh no, 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 no. Coming in at number 4 is a thriller that will absolutely surprise nobody. If anybody has been around my channel for more than 5 minutes, you will have heard me talk about the first book in this series at some point, because indeed it is the first book in the series, and controversially I have really come to believe that I think it's the only book you should read in this series. Allow me to explain. This is of course Sweetpea by C.J. Skuse. It is about Rhiannon, who is aggressively average. She lives in a pokey little flat with her builder boyfriend, who she just kind of likes. He's convenient, I guess. The only person that she really loves and who she believes actually loves her back is her tiny terrifying chihuahua. Rhiannon also works at a newspaper, but hers is small and local and very pedestrian, and she absolutely never gets to write about anything interesting, and she hates all of her co-workers. Oh, and also she's a serial killer. Yep. An actual honest-to-God serial killer who spends her spare time making kill lists of all of the people who have annoyed her. Some of those are her co-workers, some of those are people on the street, and some of those are people at the checkout who have bruised her apples. I too write similar lists in my head sometimes, but unlike Rhiannon, I almost never carry them out, and she almost always does. Not only are we thrown in from page 1 to the most bizarre kill scene I have ever seen in my life in any book that I have ever read, but we are also slowly finding out who Rhiannon is, because she was not created in a vacuum. She has not come to killing quite of her own volition. Finding out who Rhiannon is and where she came from is such a vital component of this book. I spent the entire time being like, oh baby, and then like, oh god, she really did that. Yep, she really okay, she really did that. It is one of the best thrillers I have ever read, and the ending is just perfect. Yeah, it's a cliffhanger. No, it doesn't wrap anything up, but it's perfect. It's great, and you should read it, and the rest of them you should totally consider as optional. Next up, coming in at number 3, is a bit of an outlier. Not only is it a historical thriller, which is historically, see what I did there, not my thing, but it is also a retelling, which is something that I'm usually extremely picky about, especially when it's a retelling of a classic and it's a retelling of one of my favourite books. But this retelling is like nothing you've ever read before. This is Jane Steele by Lindsay Faye, and it is a murdery retelling of Jane Eyre. But wait, come back! Don't hear retelling of Jane Eyre and do what I did and run in the other direction thinking it's just a slightly stabby blow-by-blow account of the first book all over again. That is absolutely not the case. Because you see, in the world of Jane Steele, the book Jane Eyre actually exists. It is a book which Jane Steele really, really enjoys. She would like to model herself after Jane Eyre. She would like her life to be more poetic like Jane Eyre. But it's not, because she's also kind of a serial killer. Honestly, this book makes me so happy on so many different levels, because it is such a multi-layered genre book. You have historical fiction in there, you do have a retelling, but it is also a thriller, but it is also kind of a romance. I have never read a book with so much death and disaster in it where I have loved all of the characters so much. This is definitely a thriller. The pace makes you absolutely flip the pages, but somehow in amongst all of it, there is a scene in here which made me literally cry so hard that I had to wipe the screen of my Kindle because it was covered in salty, salty, sad tears. I was so emotionally invested in the characters in here. I so wanted Jane's story to have a happy ending because she just deserved something better despite killing and murdering people her entire life. But Mr. Thornfield, who is the most precious cinnamon roll in the entire world and is also completely irascible and is also very, very suspicious of Jane from day one. He spends a lot of time thwarting that potentially happy ending. But now, my friends, we have reached the nitty gritty, the top 2 positions on my top 10 thrillers list. I would like to say that this was very difficult to do, but in fact ranking just these 2 books against each other was very, very easy. It's just that ranking every other book in the world against this top 2 is very, very difficult. Coming in at number 2 is Stillhouse Lake by Rachel Caine. This list of top 10 thrillers, I think, could be summed up by thrillers that do something that I have never seen any other book do before, and that is absolutely the case with Stillhouse Lake. When I say that from the very first page of this, my pulse was literally pounding, I was terrified, and I remained in that state throughout the whole of the novel with absolutely no let-up, I am speaking no word of a lie. I have never read a thriller that could keep up the tension as perfectly as this one could. At the beginning of this book, we are introduced to Gina Royal. She is a soccer mum. She lives in the Midwest. She's shy, she's soft-spoken. And she drives up to her house one day to discover that the thing that she always worried about happening has indeed happened. A car has come around their very tight corner at far too fast a speed and has slammed into the side of their house. Gina is annoyed. She is annoyed that this has happened to her perfect family home, and she knows her husband Mel is going to be furious about it. But when she drives up there with her 2 kids in the car, what she does not expect is to be immediately arrested, because in a locked room in her house, a woman is hanging very, very dead and very, very tortured from her rafters, and the police believe that Gina absolutely had something to do with it. Flash forward many years later, and Gina has now changed her name to Gwen, and Gwen is permanently on the run, because you see, Gwen had in fact unknowingly married a serial killer, and the entire world now wants Melvin dead. And now it's absolutely determined that she knew everything about what he was doing. The victims' families are looking for her, baying mobs on the internet are looking for her, and all that Gwen can think about is keeping her children safe. Gwen has discovered that the witness protection program is not enough. It's not enough to keep her children safe, and so she has taken additional steps. Gwen thinks that Stillhouse Lake is the perfect place to hide, and then one day a body bobs to the surface of the lake that looks like it has been killed by her ex-husband, who is now in prison and surely couldn't have had anything to do with it, right? Oh, my insides just did a flip doing the synopsis for that one. There is so much in this book, so many things happen, and like the space of, I don't know, maybe 350 pages. It's another one where I feel like I know every aspect of every character. This is one of those books too where you fall in love with the side characters, where the people in Gwen's life that she's been desperately trying to keep out and away from her become so fundamental to her survival that you can't imagine them not being there. But nothing is safe. Nothing is safe anywhere, and you find yourself after like 4 chapters questioning everything. You become as paranoid as Gwen is. You need to know the answers to why these things are popping up in her life. It should be such a difficult book to read, but it's such an easy book to read, and it's another one that I absolutely flew through. I just can't believe that Rachel Caine's brain came up with some of this in a world which is so saturated now with thrillers and like killers and dead body tales, that this one does stuff that I have never seen before, despite how many books I have read in this genre. And finally, we reach number 1. I have goosebumps, guys. How about you? At number 1 is a thriller from one of my favourite authors in the world. She also writes a series, but this was her first standalone, and I didn't know what to expect of it because it was new characters, it was a new setting, and now I will never doubt her ever again. This thriller has all of my favourite things. It has a remote setting which is just as deadly as the people involved. It has a mystery that leaves you wondering if you can trust anybody. It has weird, complicated family dynamics, and right at the centre of it, it has a slow and sinister heartbeat that you can feel ringing in your ears even when you finish it. The Lost Man takes place in the punishing heat of Queensland, in the complete outback where you are literally 2 days drive from any other kind of civilization, and you best hope that you do not need medical attention because it's going to take 6 hours on a plane to get it to you. The Bright family own 2 adjacent stretches of cattle land. And at the very beginning of this novel, we follow 2 of the brothers as they look for their 3rd brother, Cameron. They find his car abandoned on an outcropping, running perfectly, stocked with food, water, air conditioning, medical supplies, everything he could possibly have needed. But Cameron has apparently got out of his car and just walked off into the heat. And in that horrible, suffocating heat, he has stripped himself down and curled up to die on the grave of an old cattleman. I cannot describe to you how mind-boggling this book is. It does that thing that you get from an unreliable narrator where you are quite happily in the point of view of somebody until you get halfway through and then you're like, oh wait, maybe I shouldn't trust this person. Except that you are in a character's mind who thinks everything in his life is just normal, and then he realises that he can't trust anybody. But who else does he go to? This is literally his family. It's the only people that he has in the world. Other than this, he is just one lone person on this massive stretch of land. There is nobody there for him. And does this actually mean that Cameron committed suicide? Or does this mean that somebody helped him to? Or does this mean, in fact, that he was murdered? The family politics in this are just so believable, but so much. There are so many different threads connecting all of these characters, and there are so many little things that you find out about right at the beginning that you don't realise are significant until you have more pieces of the puzzle, and then you're like, oh wait, I had absolutely no idea where this was going. I had no clue who had done anything until the very last chapter, and then I sat there with the book like there is distressingly little that I am able to tell you tangibly about this novel because almost everything is a spoiler because you don't realise what things are significant in here until they become significant. But the thing that I will never forget about this book is how unrelenting the atmosphere is. You can feel the heat. You are terrified for everybody all the time because you're like, if you run out of water or you can't get shade, you are going to die. Honestly, there are so many reasons why this is my favourite thriller of all time. I will never stop talking about it. I will never stop recommending it. It is just so good. And I think one of the reasons why it's so good is because there's a very particular tone that Jane Harper has of Australian authors, of Australian crime and thrillers that I don't find anywhere else in the industry. Everything is so very British or so very US centric, and the tone is so different in Australian fiction, and I just love this. I'm just such a #1 fan, and I will push this book on everybody, every birthday and every Christmas until the end of time. Okay, thank you, bye. So that's it guys, that is everything. Those are my top 10 thrillers. I can't believe that we've finally done this video. It's been requested for such a long time, but you know what pressure there is to rank something as a book person. So as always guys, please tell me, have you read any of the books on this list? Do you also love them? Have you picked up any of them because of me? And what, of course, is your favourite thriller? Because I am always up for hearing people's recommendations. If you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and then maybe I will land in somebody else's sidebar and they will find their favourite thriller. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing for more of my face and my arbitrary top 10 list. There will be far more in the future, I suspect. Hell, there are probably 10 more thrillers that I could be talking about in just a couple of weeks' time. Thanks for watching. I will see you later, guys. Bye! I want to read all of these books again right now.